While South Africa prepares to host the BRICS summit this week, there's a call for some issues to be given attention in ensuring that BRICS makes the same impact with businesses in South Africa, like in China's One Belt, One Road Global Reach initiative. It's argued that at present, South Africa's inclusion in BRICS means absolutely nothing to South African businesses. Sfiso Falala of Plus 94 Research argues that BRICS oscillates between being an accolade for being an industrialized African country to being a promise for economic inclusion and prosperity. Now, Sfiso is here to tell us his views so that he can unpack it for us. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Colin.
All right, so you are saying that BRICS means nothing to South African businesses. What's lacking there?
Well, currently, we've got to take into account that it is still relatively new, and our membership since 2010 has not really impacted the level of economic growth. Our economy is still not growing. In fact, the forecast is more negative than what we would have thought it would be at present. Businesses are not benefiting in the sense that their inclusion, even at the summit itself, they have to take the initiative to ensure that they're part of the summit. In order for the businesses to be impacted, there needs to be a clear program exactly in terms of the manufacturing, the industrialization, and economic reforms that are needed in order for us to emulate the likes of China, Brazil, and India. So currently, this is not the first BRICS summit. There has been a summit every year since 2009. And the last one was in 2017. We have not seen any difference as business in terms of our welfare. If you look at, for instance, the aim of this year's conference, there's a focus on shared growth. There's a focus also on inclusiveness, which is welcome news. But where to from here, I think, is the big question that we have been asking.
Usually when these summits are held, you would have government representatives inviting the private sector to accompany them to these kind of meetings. We've seen that with the WTO when the president went there, some business representatives went there. So with BRICS, the kind of modus operandi that you would envisage to see there, how different should it be in the space of bilateral economic arrangements and cooperation, and as far as the BRICS economic cooperation is concerned?
I think they should make a huge effort to not make the same mistakes that were made by the World Bank and also by the IMF. There should be a focus on what can trigger economic growth. There should be a focus on the realities of the economy in South Africa. First of all, what can we gain from BRICS as a country? We've got to look at that. We are sort of the less fashionable member of the whole BRICS family. If you look at the other economies in BRICS, their turnovers, their annual GDPs are in excess of $2 trillion a year. The smallest one is Russia, which is a GDP of about 1.6 trillion. We are sitting at something like 350 billion. So we are something like less than a fifth of the economy of a country of Russia, and less than a 40th of the economy of a country like China. So we are quite inferior. Also in terms of the size of our population, we have just under 60 million people. If you combine China and India, they have almost 3 billion people. So we have to take lessons from these countries. And what can we learn? What we can learn from them in order to impact business is the reforms in China, for instance, in 1978, in India in 1991. We cannot create an opportunity for business to grow without undertaking necessary economic reforms. This economy has been crying out for a catalyst for growth. What we were hoping for as business is that this BRICS summit, being chaired by South Africa, being chaired by our president, would be that catalyst for economic growth, because that's something we haven't had for a while.
But how can this catalyst for economic growth be achieved when you look at the juxtaposition of South Africa as a member of SADC, and there's a call for the fourth industrial revolution, and on the other hand, you look at the imbalance in economic growth. China's economy has improved by 6.3% in the previous quarter. And when you look at the three countries, Brazil, South Africa, as well as Russia, for example, they have back-to-back hosted the World Cup, the Soccer World Cup tournament, but their economies are in dire straits. We have a recession in Brazil. South Africa has at some stage been at zero economic growth, and even Russia as well. So this kind of trade imbalance and imbalances in economic growth, how will BRICS then benefit these emerging economies?
I think you've got to learn from some of the mistakes that they have made. If you look at the economies of the other four nations, they are not exactly the same. You look at India, about 50% of its GDP is due to trade, imports and exports. But Brazil is very different. It's only about 25% of its GDP that is due to that, because Brazil has got a focus on import substitution and industrialization. We can learn something from that. If we look at, for instance, the current issue that we are battling with in terms of the land issue, India has challenges when it comes to the actual ownership of property and property rights. So we are on a drive to raise $100 billion for investment in South Africa. So in terms of trying to raise that, if someone is going to invest that kind of money, they would want to be assured that their land will not be expropriated, on which they'll be operating the business.
All right, let me interrupt you there. We're